Welcome everyone. I want to share with you over 2 decades of visions, things I would see in my dreams, things I would see in visions and different things. And at first it really started freaking me out and didn't understand it. So the first one I had back in 1999 or 2000 was a beautiful city. I mean, the people were at peace with each other. It was just like a really nice place here on earth. So I started asking people about that. I'm like, what do they think I was seeing? And they started telling me that I was seeing the New Jerusalem, or the New Zion when heaven came to earth. And I said, no, it pretty much looks just like the cities we live in now, except for the people were happy, just happy to be there. And as it went on, I asked God, I was like, has anybody ever built a city for you? And a couple weeks later, I saw an article about a city in Chicago named Zion. And it was built by a ministry of a man named John Dowell. And he had such a successful healing ministry, he went all over the world. And he came back to northern Illinois and bought like 5,000 or 6,000 acres and built a city there that's called Zion. I'd love to tell you that that was the end of the article, but it wasn't, because people had just started, they couldn't pray in the schools anymore, and they couldn't have the 10 Commandments in the courtroom and all this other stuff because they needed government funding for the streets. As time went on, the next thing I saw was a theme park. And I thought, Lord, what are you showing me here? Why a theme park? Well, a couple of weeks after that, I was at a coffee shop in Jacksonville, Florida, and I saw a newspaper sitting beside me. I was waiting on a friend. And it had an article there that was something like Disney versus the state of Florida. So I got the article and I read it. And Walt Disney was demanding another 50-year tax-exempt status to the state of Florida, or they were going to move Disney World. And as I read on, I realized that Disney didn't move, but they had threatened to move Disney World to Georgia or Alabama or Mississippi or South Carolina or to one of the islands, because they felt that their ability to draw people into Florida was more valuable than them having to pay taxes. So long story short, at that moment right then, I realized why a theme park would have been important. So I started investigating more into that, and I found out that there was a place in Kentucky called the Creation Museum. There was a place in Florida called the Holy Land. And then there was this other place in North Carolina that the Bakers had done. And on one of my jobs, I saw and met a man that had actually, his wife had actually traveled with him. And that place sort of fell apart through some scandals and some other stuff, not really for sure. The point of all that was I'd seen it, and then there were other little pieces coming together with it that started making sense. And the next thing I saw, a replica of Noah's Ark, and all these animals around it, and I thought, well, what a great zoo exhibit. As I checked into that, I found out that the people that did the Creation Museum had started a theme park called Noah's Ark, or the Ark Experience, or something like that. Not really for sure about it. And I thought, how much more cooler was that I'd seen this in a vision, and then somebody's actually building it. And then shortly after that, the housing industry was falling apart and all these other things, and didn't make a lot of sense, but God worked everything out, and the next thing I know, we ended up in Wichita on a ranch. And then as I moved around this city and got to know people, I started noticing something different about them. Unlike any place else that I'd lived, the people here weren't opposed to hearing a message about God or Jesus or something to do with Christianity. And I'd started noticing that there was almost like there was a remnant left here in Wichita that I found very exciting. Anywhere else I lived, if I talked to 10 people, which I do, if you've known me more than 10 minutes, you probably know my faith and my beliefs. But here it was different. I could talk to 10 people and they'd listen. 2 or 3 of them would get excited about it, as opposed to everywhere else I've been. If I talk to 10 people about it, 2 or 3 of them may listen, and probably 1 out of 30 might be interested in it. The next thing I saw was a Bible museum. And I thought to myself, man, how great would it be, because this book that is literally, unquestionably, the greatest piece of literature ever written, why isn't there a museum for that? Most other successful books or pieces of literature have got some kind of museum, usually around the author's home or something like that. And I thought, wow, how come there's not a museum for the Bible? So I went and checked in on it, and I found out that some people in Oklahoma with a Hobby Lobby were building one in Washington, D.C., and I thought, man, that's so awesome. So one day, out in my fields praying, I heard the Lord tell me, he's like, tell your story. And I'm like, Lord, nobody wants to hear my story. It reads like a science fiction novel. They're not interested in that. He persisted, and it was like just a nagging voice, and it was like, or a voice just quickening me to do it. And not being a writer, I'm a carpenter by trade, not being a writer, I didn't even know how to write it. So I asked him, I was like, how do you want me to write it? And he's like, write a screenplay. So I went in, got on Google, downloaded a screenplay, and as I read through it, I figured, you know what, this is pretty much how I tell stories or how I see things. It writes, and I found out that writing a screenplay was like one of the most perfect forms of writing that I'd ever read. So I sit down, 2 weeks later, I'd finished this screenplay. But I know all of you right now are thinking that I'm talking about all this stuff and I've got to be crazy and, how do you hear from God and all these other things? Well, it's like how we receive any signal. You have to be tuned into it or looking for it or whatever, whether you're playing the radio or TV signal or light waves traveling through the fiber optics that are coming to your computer. You're not receiving anything unless you're listening for it. So I started noticing that some of the things I wrote in these stories were actually starting to happen in the world. And the biggest one was I noticed in one of the stories about a pharmaceutical company having a vaccine for a major contaminant or a virus being promoted so boldly through the media that it was actually shutting cities down, causing people to be crippled in fear. I noticed this when the corona came along and a lot of the other things I wrote in those stories. So I asked God one day, I was like, how did your prophets actually write these stories of yours that we call our Bible? How did they write these stories? A friend of mine really helped me answer that. He had taken some time to teach me how to pray, clear my head, and start getting more in tune with receiving these things that is probably more than anything God's purpose here and what's happening here on the earth. I know all this may sound really confusing and like this guy has probably lost his mind. And don't get me wrong, because at this point right here, my family thought I'd lost my mind, that my religion had made me go crazy. Everybody had practical answers to the things I was seeing and things I should be doing and all this other stuff. And believe me, even me, I wanted something like another real estate development or something else to kick back off my economy, my personal economy, and allow me to get back to doing the things that I did that had made me successful. But none of these opportunities kept coming around. And then I saw something that I thought was even more amazing. I saw this new realm of media. It was like videos or movies being combined with video games, all being encompassed in some kind of social media stuff. And the more I researched this, I started seeing these video games or stories or these interactive media that I call it. I started seeing how this media form was starting to change people's lives. And then he showed me something, how the media companies of this world literally have everybody crippled in fear. And it was a little scary to me, to be honest with you. But the more I looked and the more I researched it, the more I realized it don't matter whose agenda you're in. If you're listening to something that's got an agenda behind it, like the news or something else like this that most people listen to, it's got an agenda. And their agenda is to promote their causes and effects to keep you, encompassed by fear, doing what they want you to do. As I started seeing how that worked and controlled people literally in fear, I started noticing that there was this original interactive story that came to us, came to our minds first, settled in our hearts, and then, started changing the way we live, changing the morals and the values and things that we have. And that's when God started showing me the purpose of His Word. Not only good news, but unbelievable good news. I mean, we were created in His image, so I thought that was pretty exciting, but trying to grasp it in the mind is one thing. With my imagination, it can go to a lot of places. But how my heart started receiving that was different. And what I want to share with you is everything up to this point right there in my life was all things that could be explained or that most people already understood that I didn't, and a lot of other things. This is the thing I want you to understand, is that these forces that this media uses to control you, and most people, the sad part is, most people don't even know that they're being led and manipulated by fear or by somebody else's agenda or somebody else's cause, because they're seeking the job, they're seeking the lifestyle, they're seeking the things that's in this world. But all this stuff right now, people understand. And up to this point, everything's been okay. It was the next message that God had shared with me that gets even more exciting. All right, His children are just like the children in the wilderness. The spies are just returning from the land of Canaan. They come back. 2 of them said, hey, God will deliver these giants into our hands. Let's go fight them. The other 10 are like, oh, no. We're like grasshoppers compared to them. There's no way we'll defeat them in their walled cities and all these other things. So this message is for God's people. It's okay to take your traditions, your religion and your traditions, and head into the wilderness. And what happened to the people in the wilderness? I mean, because it was the safer pathway. They didn't and weren't encouraged enough by their faith in God to go tear down these giants, to go face the giants. So the choice is basically up to you. He's going to love you either way. I'll love you either way. It's no big deal. Follow your traditions into the wilderness, or follow Joshua and Caleb and go tear down these giants. And the media giant is one of the biggest one in the world. And I said, Lord, that's pretty harsh. Why would you want to do this? I mean, or who would even be commissionable to do such an act? And it's when He explained to me why, that I thought, wow, okay. His temples got shut down with this virus and all the hysteria and everything else that's been happening with it on the media. And He's not going to have that. These temples were a place originally created for people to come have an encounter with Him, even to be healed. So right now, at this point, everything from here on out, and the rest of the stuff I'm going to be talking to you about, is what His plan and how we tear down these giants and what we do about that. How are we going to do this? Would you believe me if I told you that all this negative energy in the world has positive potential? And all we got to do right now to battle these media giants is, and this might be hard for you to understand, all we got to do is tell the truth. I mean, all these news channels and everything you listen to are literally entertainment medias. They're listed as entertainment venues, so you can't sue them because of the things they tell you. And they all have an agenda. And that agenda is to keep control of you. The first thing that we're going to do is create the good news media, followed by the unbelievably good news media, which is only found in God and His children. And the second step of what we're doing is we're creating a studio, which is going to have a school and an academy there, where we'll be developing this new interactive media, a media that is actually about enhancing people's lives and transforming their lives. We have plenty of project ideas. We know that you have a lot of them too. You just may not know it at this point. But I'm doing a separate video on this, and you can check that out too. And it's available to people who get done with the class that we're teaching, because the one thing I've learned through the last 20 years or more about all these things that I see and recognize them and all this other stuff is that we all have this potential. I mean, we all were literally created in God's image, which may be hard for a lot of people to believe. You were created to be a God. And Jesus even said that. Don't your scriptures say that ye are gods? We're creating a medium here to battle the lies. And we're going to do it with the truth. Before everybody gets excited like we're trying to build something to tear down governments and all these other things, we're not. We're building a media and a media platform to start enhancing people's lives. Not only do we want you to learn how to tell your story, but giving you the platform to create it. Because one of the greatest things that I've learned about God through these last 20 years is all of His children are very creative. And that's the very nature of love. And let me ask you this. Has anything in your life enhanced you more than something you have learned or something you have loved? So think of this studio and this academy that we're building more along the lines of this. You're going to be learning how to love. And not only love yourself, but learn how to share that love with others in very creative ways. Ways that are so creative that I don't think the world has even seen the potential of God's children. But our scriptures are filled with the ways that His children fight battles. And that's really exciting to me because, you know, in the Egyptian courtroom, when Moses went in and threw his stick down, it turned into a snake. And Pharaoh's magicians came out and did the same thing, except Moses' snake eat the Pharaoh's snakes. And then Jesus made this statement. I'm going to paraphrase this, but He said this. He said, if I hadn't have done the works that no others had done, you would have an excuse. But since I have done the works that no others have done, when I leave here, you'll be left in your sins. And we know that the sins in this world are leading everybody to death and causing them to die. So this first class that we have right now is basically an introduction. We call it the design class, but it's teaching you how to unlock that inner potential, your intuitive knowledge, and even the deeper realms, what is called the quickening spirit. We plan to make this a model for the rest of the world to follow our students and what they create and what they learn, along with a platform to tell their stories to the world. God's turning a light on here in Wichita for the rest of the world to follow. I'm Johnny Miniard. I look forward to meeting you.